Hello, here is Unit E's main slideshow, and it's about the presidency. Okay. On the left, we see the official presidential seal, and on the right, we see the events surrounding the first inauguration of President George Washington. Okay. Took place in New York City because Washington, D.C. had not been built yet. Okay. In America, our Constitution has set up the presidency as the key player in the executive branch. Executive comes from the phrase execute the laws. Execute in this sense means to enforce. So the president is the chief executive who is in charge of enforcing the national laws passed by Congress. Since the president cannot enforce national laws by himself, he has thousands of enforcement assistants in the executive branch to help him enforce national laws. So, the main officials of the executive branch are the president, vice president, and the secretaries of 15 executive departments. So, if you've ever heard Secretary of Defense, that is the Department of Defense is an executive department. The head of that department is called the Secretary of Defense. Okay. And so there's a whole bunch of these different departments, each with its own secretary. Now, some of these departments you may not have heard of. So if we look at Attorney General with a red star next to it, the Attorney General is actually the Secretary of the Justice Department. He's just given that name, okay, or that title. Secretary of the Interior, that takes care of most of land owned by the national government, which also includes national parks. And that also deals with Native American reservations. Down at the bottom with the green star, Secretary of Commerce deals with banking and business and trade. And over on the far right, the orange star, Secretary of Energy, that department deals not only with our energy infrastructure, but also with our stockpile of nuclear weapons. Okay. From Article 1 that we studied previously, the president was given the power to veto laws passed by Congress, appoint Supreme Court justices and ambassadors, make treaties with foreign countries. And Article 1 also stated the steps Congress could take to impeach the president. Now, those 4 points were all in Article 1 because they involve sharing political power with Congress. Article 2, on the other hand, includes the rest of the constitutional rules that pertain to the president. So, to the left there, that's a painting at the top of a book cover of George Washington trying to lead a debate at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Okay. So if we go back to the right in the blue and red box, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia created the institution of the presidency. So there just wasn't an election of a president. The institution are all those different departments, the department secretaries, and the hundreds of thousands of federal workers who work in those departments. Where did the Constitutional Convention delegates get their ideas for the presidency? The delegates to the convention created the institution of the presidency by looking at the tyrannical actions of the British king. Number two, how governors worked in the 13 states. And three, the failure of the Articles of Confederation was driven by the lack of a president. That's right. Maybe some of you remember the Articles of Confederation. It had no Supreme Court and no president. No wonder it was such a loser of a national plan of government. British kings were guilty of being noble snobs who treated Americans as lower class colonials. Down at the bottom left, that's King George III in his later years. King George used his enforcement powers to send British agents and soldiers to America to force British laws on American colonists who had no representatives in Parliament and they didn't vote for the king. Okay. So by 1776, Americans around the country started to destroy things that belonged to the king or were statues of the king. As the bottom right painting shows, angry New Yorkers tearing down the statue of King George on a horse. From the experience with British kings, the delegates to the convention made sure that the American president would be elected to his position. The president could be removed from office under certain conditions, which is impeachment. No hereditary title like the British royalty, which is snobbery. And the Congress and Supreme Court were given powers that checked the political power of a president. So, separation of powers and checks and balances would make sure that a president would not get too cocky and become a tyrant. From looking at how governors of the first 13 states ran the state governments. Remember, before there were 13 states, there were 13 colonies, and those 13 colonies had rules by which the colonial governors had to abide by. So a lot of those colonial and then state rules for governor, hey, the successful states said, let's take a lot of those rules for governors and put them in place for the president. So some state constitutions force the governor to win the consent of the state senate when appointing key executive assistants. The term of 4 years seemed like the best duration for governors. So why not for president? Most states paid their governor a fair salary, which seemed to keep down the amount of bribes. Most governors were the commanders in chief of their state militia, but the money for running a militia had to be approved by the state legislature. Just like in the Constitution, the president just can't pay the military anything. That money has to be voted in by Congress. Most governors were the key enforcers of the state laws passed by the state legislatures. Now, the third element in where the delegates kind of got their views about what the president should be like, it was from the failed experiment of the Articles of Confederation, which never allowed a president. I mean, that just in hindsight, that seems kind of stupid. America's first written plan of government, the Articles of Confederation, had no president or executive branch to enforce national laws. So many state governments voted to ignore congressional laws that state politicians did not agree with. The national government was weak without a president to enforce national laws. Okay, so as we start to see that goofy looking printing format, those are going to be the original words of the Constitution. So, key duties of the president from Article 2. The most important duty: he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, which means he's going to enforce the national laws of Congress. The next one: the president shall be commander in chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. Okay, where's the Air Force? Well, there were no planes until 130 years later. Okay, where's the Marines? The Marines did not have very high officers. The Marines served on naval ships under naval officers. Uh, and the president shall nominate and appoint judges of the Supreme Court. And that's only part of what has to happen for a judge to get into the Supreme Court. Each justice to the Supreme Court, the nomination by the president has to be passed by the Senate. Okay? Here's another line from Article 2. No person except a natural born citizen shall be eligible to the office of the president. Now, some of you know about Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was governor of California, a fairly popular guy throughout the USA. Seemed pretty smart, seemed kind of like, well, he was a Republican, but he thought about both sides. Now, natural born citizen means the candidate has to be born in America or to have been born in America. Arnold, in the bottom right, was born in Austria, so he could not run for president. I know that's a bad impersonation. Article 2 also said at the bottom there in purple, presidents also have to be at least 35 years of age to run for the presidency. What does this sentence from Article 2 mean? No person except a natural born citizen shall be eligible. Oh, well, you got to be 35. So I guess I should have had that one before the last slide. Duh. Before entering on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath. So here's the presidential oath that he takes on Inauguration Day. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So on the bottom left, we see Washington with his hand on the Bible, swearing to defend the Constitution. In the middle, we see John F. Kennedy in the early part of 1961, swearing on the Bible. Across from him is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who conducts the swearing in ceremony. And on the bottom right is Donald Trump, swearing that he will defend the Constitution and not start any insurrections. Now, another key term from Article 2 is the president shall be commander in chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. So our president gives orders to military commanders. That's unlike many other countries that are run by military dictatorships who give orders to politicians in how they must vote, or they'll go to jail or die. So the president in our country is in charge of the generals and admirals, not the other way around. In the bottom left, in the middle of that bench, that's Franklin Roosevelt, who commanded American generals and admirals during World War II against the Nazis and the Japanese. He died during the last few months of the war. The guy who took over for him is on the bottom right, Harry Truman. And Harry Truman fired Douglas MacArthur, the top general in Korea for the United States. President Truman fired MacArthur for MacArthur not following orders when Truman told him, you will no longer talk about using nuclear weapons on the Chinese when they come into the Korean War. Okay, serious deal there. MacArthur was very popular with many Americans. Next language. The president, excuse me, the president may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices. Okay? All right, down below it says State Department, Secretary of State, Cabinet. All right? So the president's cabinet, although the word cabinet is not in the Constitution, the president's cabinet is the main group of his assistants who give him information about decisions that he should make. The main cabinet members are the principal officers of each executive department, like the Department of State, Department of Interior, Department of Justice. And the principal officer is the secretary of that department. Okay, so the first cabinet was four guys. Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. Secretary of State deals with foreign countries. Like back then, whoa, what are we going to do about how we deal with France and England? The first Secretary of the Treasury was Alexander Hamilton. And notice that on your $10 bills, Hamilton's face is on the front. He set up the first U.S. Treasury Department and how to handle money. The first Secretary of War is called War back there, not Secretary of Defense. He was Henry Knox, wearing a uniform. He served as Washington's cannon commander during the Revolutionary War. And then the Attorney General, which was the head of the Justice Department, was Edmund Randolph, who was with George Washington in Virginia as one of the leaders of the Virginia uh, legislature. Okay, the word cabinet was not in the Constitution. Washington probably created the term himself. Not sure, but most probably. Today's cabinet has the VP and 15 executive departments and a few other key important workers within the executive branch. So it's just not the VP and those 15. There's like another, I don't know, 7 to 10 members of the cabinet who advises the president. Okay, so this wording, here it is. He shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors and judges of the Supreme Court. So the president nominates Supreme Court judges and ambassadors to go and serve overseas in other countries' national capital cities as ambassadors for the U.S. The president nominates the Supreme Court justices and the ambassadors, but it's up to the Senate to pass those nominations. And so that's called confirming those nominations of the president. So that's kind of like sharing of power between the US Senate and the president. Ambassadors serve in foreign embassy buildings. Right there, bottom left, you can see the American ambassador to the African nation of Nigeria. Okay. And over on the right bottom, that's the American embassy in Nigeria. The president shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the union. State there does not mean like a U.S. state. It means the condition of our country. The union means USA. The condition of America. Well, where does that take place? When? During the year? How often? For what purpose? Who is in the live audience? Well, here's a picture. What the president does is he goes up in front of the House of Representatives chamber, which just has a ton of room. And seated in front of him are all the House of Reps, all the 100 senators, Supreme Court judges, and the top military commanders. And then up in that kind of like second story, those are key invited guests. Okay. The State of the Union address is an annual message delivered by the President of the United States to a joint session of the United States Congress near the beginning of most calendar years on the current condition of the nation. Ta-da. Now, the Constitution says the president shall commission all the officers of the United States military. Well, today, there's too many officers who graduate in 3 or 4 ceremonies at the end of each school year for the president to go around and shake each of those persons' hands. But he does go to, during his term, maybe 2 or 3 of the individual graduations of either the Air Force or the Army or the Navy of their seniors from those officer colleges. Okay. Um, but what he really does, he signs the certificate that is the order that says you are now a commissioned officer in the U.S. military. Um, Down at the bottom right, the first modern black student to attend the U.S. Naval Academy for officers was Wesley Brown, who graduated in 1949. So before World War II, there were no black commissioned officers, which is lieutenant up to general, um, in the U.S. Army and the rest of the military forces. In the photo at the left, President Barack Obama shakes the hand of a newly commissioned officer at the U.S. Naval Academy graduation. Well, a picture like that would have never have taken place before World War II, because all presidents were white men and all naval officers were, I'm pretty sure they were all white men. I don't know if any Latinos were admitted. Now, my son-in-law, Mark, was commissioned as a naval officer in 2016. That's the Navy Stadium that is only about maybe half an hour away from Washington, D.C. And this is right outside of the Naval College for U.S. naval officers. And my daughter and wife are on the left of Mark, on his right. In case of the removal of the president from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the duties of his presidency, the vice president shall take over. On the left, that is the casket that contains the dead body of President Harding, who died in the early 1920s. And then his vice president, upon Harding's death, Calvin Coolidge, took over as president. On the right, that picture was taken in a plane, and that is Vice President Lyndon Johnson being sworn in as president. His wife, you can see, is to the left of him in the picture, and the dead president's wife, Jackie Kennedy, is to the right of him in the picture. Jackie Kennedy's husband, President Kennedy, had just been killed in an assassination on the streets of Dallas. And so Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as the next president after JFK was shot and killed. Now, the last section is the impeachment of the president, and I'll kind of show a few cartoons here. Now, these just aren't silly cartoons. You know, before TV and radio and the internet, political cartoons was a way for very smart guys to get their political points across by being snarky and sarcastic in the major newspapers. And these cartoons were big deals. They offered a cartoonist to allow his opinion to be put into major newspapers. Now, the cartoon on the left has a short Andrew Johnson kind of standing and shocked in front of Uncle Sam. Now, this artist from a New York newspaper created the symbol of Uncle Sam as kind of like the leadership of American government. So all the heads of American government together uh, were under the symbol of Uncle Sam. And down below, way down below, it says Andy, who is Andrew Johnson, the impeached president. He's surprised. Why, how large you are, Uncle. I thought I was taller till you got up. So this is making fun of Andrew Johnson. And the writer or artist of this cartoon thought that Johnson could get away with thinking he could boss Congress around. And then Congress rose up. They impeached him, but the Senate did not convict him. So he stayed in office. Boo. Okay. Now, over on the right, it's a cartoon about a little boy who wants to learn knowledge. And so he gets down a book called The Constitution of the U.S., and it's just too big for him to understand. So the book falls on him and it kills him. Okay. Um, that's supposed to be funny. And then this is an apolitical cartoon. This is actually an artist's rendering of what the trial of Andrew Johnson looked like in the US Senate. And then there's a great political cartoon here. Richard Nixon was on his way to be impeached, but he resigned. He quit the presidency before he could be impeached because basically he was caught red-handed. Bill Clinton was caught red-handed lying to a jury. He was impeached, but the Senate did not convict him because they thought that his lying to a jury about having sex with an intern, that really did not have too much to do with him being a president, whether you agree with that or not, whatever. And same thing with, Trump being impeached for trying to shake down the president of Ukraine with a call to get certain information, probably in a bribery type of way. I did not explain that well, so sorry. But Trump was impeached twice. The next 4 slides will have constitutional language, okay? So impeachment in the original Constitution, in Article 2, this is all it says: the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Notice it doesn't say a president can be thrown out for impeachment. It's only when he's been impeached, which means he has been given criminal charges. That's what impeachment means. Conviction means the trial that says those criminal charges are true and he should be tossed out of office. Now, Article 1 says the key powers to kick a president out of office. First of all, the House of Reps shall have the sole power of impeachment. And remember, all impeachment is to bring criminal charges against a president. That's it. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. What's the root word of trial? Try. So the Senate would be involved in a trial once an impeachment was passed by the House. When the president of the U.S. is tried, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court shall preside over that trial, and no person and no president shall be convicted without the concurrence or without the passage of 2/3 of the members present, 2/3 of the senators present. A judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than removal from office. So impeachment can't put a criminal president in jail. It can only kick him out of office. So here's kind of like the analysis part, okay? So here's the process. In impeachment proceedings, the House of Reps charges the president by approving by simple majority vote articles of impeachment. The House of Reps sends its articles of impeachment to the Senate, okay? And the House of Reps also sends what are called impeachment managers. And those are like some of the best lawyers in the House of Reps. They are going to take the case of the House of Reps up to the